Welcome to Fiction Audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribing would be greatly appreciated. If you have any recommendations for novels, comment below.
Please join my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/fictionaudiobook.
Chapter 359, NZNT, Chapter. Because, in the intelligence provided to Ichigo by Kasuke, the Espada were the highest level combat force in Las Noches. Yami, Because, in the intelligence provided to Ichigo by Kasuke, the Espada were the highest level combat force in Las Noches. Yami, the big guy who had stumped him in the human world, was just the adjutant of Ulquiorra, one of the Espada. This news shocked Ichigo immensely, and also made him extremely wary of the Espada. Although he had the shadow cloak to protect him at this time, Ichigo was still extremely cautious, lest he be seen through by the other party. It seems that even with the shadow cloak, it's impossible to enter Las Noches from the main gate. Seeing the heavily guarded palace gate, with even an Espada member personally stationed there, Ichigo had no choice but to look for other entrances. Just as Ichigo was groping around outside Las Noches, Orihime and Sado also began to try to find traces of Rukia and Yusuki on the outside. The two of them searched for several high points outside, wanting to use the terrain to observe the situation around Las Noches from top to bottom, but they didn't find any clues related to Rukia Kachiki or Yusuki. Just as the two were feeling discouraged, Orihime suddenly felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. Sado-kun, did you hear anything? Orihime said to Sado, who was beside her. Although she was asking Sado a question, Orihime didn't wait for Sado's answer. Instead, the two of them turned their heads to look behind them at the same time, and saw a cute little girl holding a hollow dog staring straight at them. Did she discover us, and there's a crow mark on her clothes? Mr. Shopkeeper said before that this is a symbol of the high-level executives of Las Noches, Orihime said in a very soft voice in Sado's ear, standing on tiptoe. She shouldn't have discovered us, right? Sado said uncertainly. The one who appeared in front of Orihime and Sado at this time was Yuichiro Kusajishi, who was the president of the Women's Association of Las Noches. Hey, you two, who are you? What are you doing here sneaking around? Yuichiro crossed her arms, frowned on her small face, and looked at the two of them with a serious expression. Hearing Yuichiro's question, Orihime and Sado also knew that the other party had discovered them. A forced smile appeared on Orihime's face, and she quickly began to organize her words. We're right, we're playing hide-and-seek here. Orihime said, thinking she was being clever. However, as soon as the words came out, Orihime immediately regretted it. How could anyone believe such a childish excuse? Sado, who was beside her, was even ready to carry Orihime and run away. However, hearing Orihime's words, Yuichiro's eyes lit up, and a happy smile bloomed on her face. So you're playing hide-and-seek. I'm bored anyway, I'll join you. Originally, Yuichiro was going to find Lily Nettie and Nell to play with, but Nell, as one of the Espada, had her own duties, and Lily Nettie was comforting her lonely Uncle Stark. With her two best playmates not around, Yuichiro was bored. Orihime and Sado looked at each other in dismay, not expecting that they could get away with it like this. However, the other party said that she wanted to play together, which seemed to put them in a new predicament. At this time, Sado's eyes, hidden under his hair, gave Orihime a look, meaning, why don't I just carry you and run away now? Orihime understood his meaning and nodded lightly. Although running away might cause some commotion, with the shadow cloak, as long as they could distance themselves from the people chasing them, they would be able to successfully get rid of the other party. Oh, but wearing these cloaks to play hide-and-seek is too unfair. I couldn't see you from a distance just now. Why don't you take them off first and let me keep them for you? At this time, Orihime and Sado realized that Yuichiro had come in front of them at some point, and had also taken off the shadow cloaks from their shoulders with a speed they couldn't understand, and was holding them in her hands. The two of them showed wry smiles on their faces. They had no choice now. Without the shadow cloaks, they wouldn't be able to carry out their subsequent actions at all. And the amazing speed that this little girl had just displayed also let them know that the Las Noches high-level mark on this little girl's uniform was probably not fake, and the other party's strength was definitely not as harmless as it looked. I'm the president of the Women's Association, Yuichiro Kusajishi. Who are you? We're just ordinary people. I'm Orihime Inoue, and he's Yasutora Sado. You should go with me to change into a set of clothes first, otherwise it's very inconvenient. You might be taken away by the guards as unknown people while playing hide-and-seek. The guards don't know that you're my friends. In this way, Orihime and Sado actually entered Las Noches one step ahead of Ichigo. Damn it, is the palace gate the only entrance to the entire Las Noches? Ichigo, who had been circling outside the palace gate of Las Noches for several hours, circled back to the palace gate again. Looking at Luppy, who was sitting on a small bench with his chin propped up, looking like a girl lost in thought. Ichigo was also very anxious. At this time, someone Ichigo didn't expect actually appeared. The visitor was Yami, who had fought him fiercely in Karakura town. Yami looked to be in a bad mood at this time. Seeing Luppy, who had defeated him and taken his position as one of the Espada, he was even more furious. At #UN%%% and. Yami walked up to Luppy and spat a lot of trash talk on Luppy's face. How could Luppy, as one of the Espada, endure Yami's provocation? He immediately launched a sharp verbal counterattack, and the two of them started cursing at each other. As they cursed, the two of them gradually lost control of their tempers, and actually started fighting. As they fought to a position relatively far away from the palace gate, and the Arrancar guards on the side immediately stepped forward to mediate. Two Espada-level Arrancar were wrestling. These guards were definitely unable to pull them apart, and didn't dare to step forward to pull them apart. If they weren't careful, they would lose their lives. However, it was still possible to persuade them verbally from the side. Luppy-sama, please don't bother with Yami-sama. Yami-sama is probably drunk again. Yami-sama, please don't always make trouble for Luppy-sama. This is already the 29th time this month. Because they didn't dare to release their spiritual pressure to fight outside Las Noches, Yami and Luppy could only rely on the strength of their bodies to fight. At this time, the two of them had completely lost the decency of being high-level members of Las Noches, and were rolling around on the ground covered in dust, both being beaten black and blue by the other. And because Yami was tall, muscular, and strong, he naturally had a great advantage in this close-quarters melee without using spiritual pressure, and he quickly gained the upper hand, pressing Luppy to the ground and beating him up. Because of the commotion caused by Luppy and Yami, all the guards outside the palace gate gathered around the two of them to mediate, and for a time, the defenses at the palace gate were in a state of emptiness. If a normal person wanted to enter Las Noches directly from the palace gate, of course, they would still be unable to escape the sight or spiritual pressure perception of the people around them, but for Ichigo, who had the shadow cloak, this was an excellent opportunity. Seeing the girl being trampled under Yami, Ichigo resisted the urge to do what was right and secretly slipped into Las Noches. $20. $40. Chapter 360, NZNT, Chapter. Due to the struggle between Luppy and Yami, Ichigo seized the opportunity to slip into Las Noches. After Ichigo passed through a long corridor. Due to the struggle between Luppy and Yami, Ichigo seized the opportunity to slip into Las Noches. After Ichigo passed through a long corridor, a patrol team composed of Arrancar came towards him. In Las Noches, Grimmjow, the sixth Espada, was currently in charge of patrolling duties. Through Grimmjow's attire, Ichigo could easily determine that the other party was also a member of the Espada. Damn it, there's no way to avoid him in this position. If he comes straight over, I'll be exposed. Looking at Grimmjow getting closer and closer to him, Ichigo thought to himself that things were bad. At this time, Ichigo was in a corner of a corridor, which was a dead end on one side, and the path that Grimmjow was leading the patrol team on the other. Just then, suddenly another high-level member of Las Noches with a crow mark on his uniform appeared here, with a slender figure and a black eye patch over his left eye. It was Neutra, the eighth Espada. Seeing Neutra's appearance, Grimmjow actually changed his route, turned around, and led the team directly to Neutra's front. Grabbing Neutra's collar, Grimmjow said angrily, "You bastard, you were so dishonorable in the last fight." According to the traditional rules of sparring, it should have been considered a draw at that time. Neutra sneered upon hearing this, and brushed away Grimmjow's hand grabbing his collar. "Grimmjow, when did you become as nagging as those women? There's no such thing as a draw in battles between hollows. Besides, I was just messing around that time. Who knew you'd be so careless? You weren't just messing around, you used Sonito and Gran Rey Zero." Grimmjow retorted. Grimmjow and Neutra's voices grew louder and louder as they argued, and it looked like they were about to start fighting. However, since they were already inside Las Noches, neither of them dared to make the first move, and they just kept taunting each other verbally. Phew, that was so lucky. I was almost discovered by the patrolling Arrancar. But it seems like the higher-ups of Las Noches aren't very harmonious. Ichigo breathed a sigh of relief, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and thought to himself. Bypassing Grimmjow and Neutra, who were still tearing each other apart, Ichigo arrived outside the palace of Las Noches, which was almost the core location of the entire Las Noches. At this time, two girls walked out of the palace, one of whom was Rukia, whom Ichigo had been worried about, and the other girl was Aizen Yusuke's lieutenant, Nagato Yu. Ichigo watched the two of them from afar, preparing to find an opportunity to approach Rukia when she was alone. Because he was afraid of being discovered by Yu, who was talking to Rukia, Ichigo stayed relatively far away, and couldn't hear what they were talking about at all. Suddenly, Ichigo noticed that Yu, who was talking to Rukia, was looking straight at him, which made Ichigo's heart skip a beat, and he had a feeling that he was being locked on by the other party's gaze. Fortunately, however, the other party quickly looked away again, as if nothing had happened, and continued to talk to Rukia normally. You and Rukia didn't talk for too long, and you soon left first. Rukia glanced at Ichigo's location, and then turned and walked towards the northeast direction of Las Noches. The interior of Las Noches was composed of many palace complexes, covering a very large area. Not all of the palaces inside were occupied, and many palaces were abandoned. And the palace complex in the northeast corner of Las Noches was completely empty, with no guards at all. Ichigo followed Rukia all the way, and he also found that it was getting quieter and quieter, and there were fewer and fewer guards around. At this time, he seemed to understand that Rukia had already discovered him, and was deliberately leading him to a deserted place. Rukia, you've already discovered me, haven't you? After entering an empty palace, Ichigo took off his shadow cloak on his own initiative, and asked Rukia, who was facing away from him. That's right, but it wasn't me who discovered you, but you senpai just now, Rukia said slowly, turning around. The exquisite snow-white robe and Sodi no Shirayuki, which exuded a faint chill at her waist, gave Rukia a bit of coldness at this time, and she no longer had the cute and relaxing aura of a girl next door that she had in the human world. Ichigo was very uncomfortable with Rukia's change. Looking at the crow mark on Rukia's clothes, Ichigo forced a smile and said, I'm relieved to see that you're okay, but I didn't expect you to become a high-level member of Las Noches. As soon as he finished speaking, a slender shoe sole suddenly magnified rapidly in front of him, and then Rukia actually kicked him in the face and knocked him to the ground. Smack! Rukia took off the shoe on her right foot, and directly slapped Ichigo on the head with the sole, like a mother teaching her son a lesson. Hey, what are you doing running to Hueco Mundo? Do you know how dangerous it is here? Are you courting death? Did you bring Orihime and Sato here with you, you bastard? Then, Rukia went on a tirade, scolding Ichigo non-stop while hitting him with the shoe sole, complaining that Ichigo and the others shouldn't have come to Hueco Mundo. Seeing Rukia's performance, Ichigo felt happy in his heart. Rukia hadn't changed, she was still the Rukia he knew. In the past, when Rukia and he were messing around, he would always fight back, but today he chose to cover his head and let Rukia bully him. After hitting him with the shoe sole for a while, Rukia was also a little tired, put her shoe back on, and then sat down next to Ichigo. Ichigo, do you know how dangerous Las Noches is? If it wasn't for you senpai, but you were discovered by other Arrancar, you might not have had the chance to see me alive, Rukia said slowly. Because you had seen Ichigo, who had come to rescue Rukia, during the Sokayaku Hill battle, she recognized Ichigo at a glance when she saw him. Knowing that Ichigo was Rukia's friend, you didn't take action directly, but told Rukia about Ichigo's existence, hoping that Rukia could handle it herself. The you-senpai you're talking about is the girl who was chatting with you just now, right? I didn't expect the people in Las Noches to be so humane, Ichigo said with a smile. Whack. Rukia slapped Ichigo hard on the back, and the great force made Ichigo grimace in pain. Las Noches isn't what you imagine it to be, a hellish scene with ferocious hollows and Arrancar everywhere. There's order here, and in addition to hollows, there are also some Shinigami living here, Rukia explained. Having just been beaten hard by Rukia again, Ichigo, unable to bear it any longer, was about to launch a counterattack, but Rukia's next words stopped his fist that he had already raised. You came this time for Ishida-kun, right? Rukia asked, looking at Ichigo. Ichigo sighed, as I thought, you already know about Yuryu, but why didn't you save him? Rukia shook her head and said, it's not that I don't want to save Ishida-kun, but there are many things that I can't say. But I can assure you that as long as I'm here, Ishida-kun won't be in danger. Although what Rukia said wasn't what Ichigo wanted to hear the most, Ichigo could understand her difficulties. At this time, Rukia's identity was neither a Shinigami of the Godai 13, nor their classmate, but a member of Las Noches. Standing in Rukia's position, she couldn't do anything that would be detrimental to Las Noches. Being able to do her best to ensure Yuryu Ishida's safety was enough to show that she hadn't given up on their friendship. $20. $40. Chapter 361, NZNT, Chapter. Thank you, Rukia, but I won't leave Hueco Mundo without rescuing Yuryu. Ichigo said, looking at Rukia with firm eyes. Rukia looked straight. Thank you, Rukia, but I won't leave Hueco Mundo without rescuing Yuryu. Ichigo said, looking at Rukia with firm eyes. Rukia looked straight into Ichigo's eyes. From the look in his eyes, she knew that no matter how much she tried to persuade him, she wouldn't be able to change his mind. Slowly standing up, Rukia placed her hand on the hilt of her Zanpakuto. A cold aura instantly emanated from her body, completely freezing the entire palace into an ice palace. Seeing this scene, Ichigo was also shocked. It seemed that Rukia was preparing to attack him, and it was clear that her current power was far greater than when he had seen her before. Rukia, what are you going to do? Ichigo stood up and asked in a deep voice. Rather than let you be killed by others in Las Noches, I might as well defeat you here. At least you'll still have your life, Rukia said calmly. Ichigo didn't seem to believe that this was a decision Rukia would make, and asked with wide eyes, are you serious? Rukia drew Sodi no Shirayuki from her waist. Crystal-clear snowflakes wrapped around the slender blade, beauty concealing danger. Sodi no Shirayuki, Tsugi no Mai, Hakurin. Rukia pointed Sodi no Shirayuki in her hand at Ichigo in front of her. Countless snowflakes instantly surged from the sword, directly rushing towards Ichigo, instantly submerging Ichigo completely within them. Rukia gently waved Sodi no Shirayuki in her hand, and the surging snowflakes all dispersed to both sides, revealing Ichigo in the middle. At this time, Ichigo had completely turned into an ice sculpture, his face frozen with a look of surprise and disbelief at seeing Rukia attack. "I'm sorry, Ichigo, but don't worry, I'll take good care of Ishida-kun, and I'll safely send Inoue-kun and Sato-kun back to the real world." Rukia slowly sheathed her Zanpakuto, and was about to use the artificial garganta, invented by the Research and Development Department to send Ichigo back to the real world, when suddenly cracks appeared on Ichigo's body, which was like an ice sculpture. Soon, these cracks quickly expanded, and the ice layer covering Ichigo's body completely collapsed, turning into countless ice crystals that scattered. "Rukia, I didn't expect you to become so strong, but I haven't been standing still either." Ichigo smiled and moved his arms, and then took his Zanpakuto off his back. "Since you don't think I have the ability to rescue Yuryu, then I'll show you my latest training results. This one doesn't work, and this one doesn't work either. What should I do? We don't seem to have a uniform suitable for Sato-chan here." In the Lost No Chase Women's Association, Yuichiro was flipping through the uniforms in stock, wanting to change Orihime and Sato into them. Orihime had successfully changed into a uniform. Apart from feeling a little tight in the chest area, there were no other problems, but a uniform suitable for Sato's tall and muscular body had not yet been found. At this time, a large-sized uniform with very little fabric, which looked like it was for women, attracted Yuichiro's attention. Yuichiro picked up this uniform with a bit of disgust, and then said happily with a smile, "I've got it, you can wear Charlotte-chan's uniform." The Charlotte-chan that Yuichiro mentioned was Charlotte Chulhorn, the fraction of the second Espada Barragan, who was the cross-dressing Arankar who was a delicate maiden on the inside but rough on the outside, and considered himself to be a rose. Because Charlotte always considered himself to be a pure-hearted maiden, he had also applied to join the Lost No Chase Women's Association. The uniform that Charlotte usually wore was specially tailored, even more tight and fitted, and revealed the abdomen and waist. Looking at the clothes in Yuichiro's hand, which were obviously not something a normal person would wear, Orihime widened her eyes and didn't know whether to laugh or cry, while Sato's face turned green. For Sato, who never changed his expression no matter what, this was already his most excited reaction. "I refuse," Sato said in a deep voice. Yuichiro scratched her head and said, "But there are no other clothes that fit you." Then, Yuichiro's originally cute little face suddenly covered with a layer of terrifying shadow, and her entire face became gloomy. "I'll secretly tell you, if non-Lost No Chase personnel appear nearby and are discovered by the guards, they'll be executed directly." Hearing Yuichiro's words, Orihime and Sato were really frightened. In the end, under Orihime's persuasion, the tough guy Sato had no choice but to put on Charlotte's sexy tight clothes. "Great, now we can start playing hide and seek. How about this, I'll be it, and you two try to catch me," Yuichiro said happily. Orihime and Sato looked at each other upon hearing this. Neither of them had expected that the infiltration would be so smooth. The two of them nodded at the same time, and then Orihime said with a smile, "Yuichiro-chan, then you should hurry up and hide. We'll go find you in a while." "Hee hee hee hee, I'm the best at playing hide and seek in Lost No Chase, I guarantee you won't find me." After saying that, Yuichiro directly turned into a black shadow and disappeared. However, what she didn't know was that Orihime and Sato had no intention of finding her at all. With the cover of the Lost No Chase uniform, Orihime and Sato, although they didn't have the shadow cloak, were able to move around even more conveniently. After some inquiries, the two of them actually found out some useful information, and after deduction, they learned that Yuryu Ishida had been taken to the Research and Development Department. At the same time, the Godii 13 of the Serii had begun to act, preparing to start a war with Hueco Mundo. Under the leadership of Captain Commander Yamamoto Genryosai, all the members participating in the war had arrived in Hueco Mundo. Everyone was equipped with a shadow cloak to prevent Hueco Mundo from discovering their whereabouts in advance. Those participating in this war, apart from the members responsible for medical care, were all at least 5th seat or higher in their respective divisions. The war in the Shinigami world was a battle of high-end combat power, especially the war between Lost No Chase and the Serii, which was the most top-level battle in the Shinigami world. Ordinary Shinigami participating in such a war wouldn't even be considered cannon fodder, but would only sacrifice themselves in vain. Not far from Lost No Chase, Yamamoto Genryosai looked solemnly at the roughly 100 Shinigami of the Godii 13 in front of him. These Shinigami were all the elites of the Godii 13. If the Godii 13 lost this battle, then not only would the Serii be greatly injured, unable to recover to its peak strength for thousands of years, but more importantly, it would lose control over the entire world. I believe everyone already understands the importance and necessity of this battle. For the Godai 13, in this battle, we can only win, not lose. Yamamoto Genryusai said slowly. His voice was still very calm, but everyone could hear an extremely strong killing intent. Everyone looked at a towering white palace not far away. They knew that was the target they had to capture. And within this target building, the strongest opponent they had ever faced in their lives was waiting for them. $20. $40. Chapter 362, NZNT, Chapter. As the members of the Godai 13 took action, Yusuke, in the Palace of Las Noches, also sensed something. Although the Shinigami dispatched by. As the members of the Godai 13 took action, Yusuke, in the Palace of Las Noches, also sensed something. Although the Shinigami dispatched by the Godai 13 were wearing shadow cloaks, which could perfectly hide their spiritual pressure, the killing intent and aura contained within them could not be concealed. If it were just 1 or 2 people, it might not be felt, but this team of nearly 100 people, almost all composed of seated officers above the 5th seat of the Godai 13, generated a field that was simply too powerful. Not only did Yusuke sense it, but almost all the higher-ups of Las Noches also noticed it. The higher-ups in their respective palaces rushed to the palace, gathering in the main hall to await Yusuke's instructions. The sudden attack of the Godai 13 was an unexpected but reasonable event for Yusuke. However, Yusuke firmly believed that the current Godai 13 was far from being a match for Las Noches. Good, let's settle things with Yamamoto Genryusai and Hueco Mundo. After this battle, Ryūjin Jakka will only have one master from now on. Yusuke thought to himself. Yusuke-sama, the enemy's aura is getting closer and closer. Should we attack now and defeat them as soon as possible? Grimmjow asked, stepping forward. At this time, he had a smile on his face, and it seemed that he was not afraid or panicked by the appearance of the enemy, but was very happy instead. Ever since Yusuke unified Hueco Mundo, he had hardly had any opportunities to fight, and he had been looking forward to this once-in-a-lifetime war for a long time. Sharing the same idea with him were Kenpachi Zaraki, who was even more warlike than him, and Noitra, who also liked fighting. Don't you all interfere, I'll fight 10 of them. Kenpachi Zaraki said directly with a loud laugh. Yusuke's gaze swept over everyone, and he found that Yachiru and Rukia had not yet arrived. However, he didn't care too much about this, and prepared to start deploying the battle arrangements. Since Soul Society wants to start a war with Hueco Mundo, then we'll give them a defeat. Yusuke stood up, his deep gaze seemed to penetrate the walls of Las Noches and see the enemies in the distance. Everyone, let us go and welcome the captains from Soul Society together. As the words fell, a terrifying aura erupted from Yusuke's body, and the powerful spiritual pressure broke through the top of Las Noches and shot straight into the sky. As Yusuke released his spiritual pressure, the higher-ups of Las Noches were also infected by Yusuke's aura, and their spiritual pressure also erupted at the same time, causing the entire Hueco Mundo to be turbulent for a time. The hollows near Las Noches also realized that something seemed wrong, and began to evacuate one after another under the coordination of the Las Noches executives, in order to prevent being affected by the upcoming battle. From the moment the spiritual pressure erupted from Las Noches, the captains of the Godai 13 knew that Las Noches had also discovered their existence, and were using spiritual pressure to demonstrate against them. The captains of the Godai 13 did not show any weakness, and everyone put away their shadow cloaks, and the powerful spiritual pressure also erupted from their bodies. The spiritual pressure of the higher-ups of Las Noches and the spiritual pressure of the members of the Godai 13 were tit for tat, and neither side would give in, unwilling to lose to the other in terms of momentum. The entire sky was as if it had been divided into 2 halves by spiritual pressure, pressing against each other. Welcome to Las Noches, captains of the Godai 13. Yusuke's voice rang out, and his figure also appeared outside Las Noches at the same time, blocking the path of the Godai 13. Behind Yusuke stood his 2 lieutenants, Mirai and Yu, and further back were the Espada members, Kenpachi Zaraki, and their respective lieutenants. As for Mayuri Kuratsuchi, he was still safely conducting scientific research in the Research and Development Department, and Byakuya Kuchiki was instructed by Yusuke to guard Las Noches and not to come out to face his former colleagues. Looking at Yusuke, who was standing at the forefront with an astonishing aura, all the members of the Godai 13 present stared at him intently, their gazes also filled with various emotions. Many of them had received Yusuke's help and guidance in the past, and admired Yusuke very much. Many seated officers were even personally promoted by Yusuke. They couldn't understand why Yusuke, who was already one of the captains of the Godai 13, would betray the Siriidii. Uchiha Yusuke, you have betrayed the Siriidii, privately organized forces in Hueco Mundo, and disrupted the balance of the entire world. For such an unforgivable crime, I will personally give you judgment. Captain Commander Yamamoto Genryusai did not beat around the bush with Yusuke, but directly declared the war. Yusuke smiled and shook his head. Captain Commander Yamamoto, you are as domineering as ever. The Siriidii is just a regime established by force in the end of thousands of years of war. The human world, Hueco Mundo, and even the Rakongai of Soul Society are just tools used by the Suriidai to maintain balance. Not everyone recognizes the legitimacy of the Suriidai. Many Shinigami of the Godai 13 thought that they were maintaining peace in the human world and Soul Society, but they didn't know that what they were maintaining was not peace, but balance. The work they did to purify hollows and perform soul burials was not to protect humans or souls, but to balance the soul power of the various worlds. If there were too many souls in the Rakongai, affecting the balance of the various worlds, the higher-ups of the Suriidai would even directly arrange for their subordinates to secretly kill the souls of the Rakongai. Such events had occurred many times in the history of Soul Society, but they were all covered up by the higher-ups of the Suriidai. Then, Yusuke slowly revealed the true work and purpose of the Shinigami, causing many members of the Godai 13 present to be shocked. What he said could be described as secrets in the Shinigami world, and even among the captains present, not many people knew about them. So the so-called Godai 13 are just tools to maintain the Suriidai regime. In fact, the Suriidai doesn't care about the humans in the real world or the souls in the Rakongai at all. Think about the decisions made by the Central 46, and there are even more things you can't imagine. Yusuke concluded with a smile. Yusuke's words greatly undermined the morale of the Godai 13, especially since many of the younger Shinigami thought that they were fighting for peace, but they didn't expect that so many inside stories were hidden behind the scenes. It turned out that they were not warriors maintaining peace, but just thugs of the higher-ups of the Suriidai. Maintaining the existence of this world is the greatest justice. What qualifications do you have to criticize everything that the Suriidai has done? Yamamoto Genryusai said coldly. He didn't expect Yusuke to know so much, and he didn't know why Yusuke knew these things. However, what Yusuke said next caused Yamamoto Genryusai, who had always been calm, to change his expression greatly. Justice. I wonder if the Soul King, who had his limbs severed and his internal organs removed by the 5 great noble families and turned into a human pillar, would agree with your justice. $20. $40. Chapter 363, NZNT, Chapter. Hearing the secrets that Yusuke revealed, Yamamoto Genryusai was finally unable to maintain his composure, and Ryūjin Jakka in his hand was. Hearing the secrets that Yusuke revealed, Yamamoto Genryusai was finally unable to maintain his composure, and Ryūjin Jakka in his hand was drawn directly, slashing towards Yusuke in front of him with unmatched momentum. Yusuke drew the Zanpakuto at his waist, which had the exact same appearance as the one in Yamamoto Genryusai's hand, and blocked the other party's slash. The collision of spiritual pressure directly set off a huge wave on the scene, causing the Shinigami of the Godai 13 and the higher-ups of Las Noches to involuntarily take a few steps back. Are you ashamed and angry? Perhaps not many people here know that the nominal ruler of the world, the Soul King, is so undignified. Yusuke said with a smile. At this time, many of the members of the Godai 13 had already begun to whisper, asking each other about the authenticity of what Yusuke said, especially the fact that the Soul King was actually a human pillar made by the 5 great noble families of Soul Society, which made it even more difficult for them to accept. But unfortunately, there were not many Shinigami present who knew these secrets, and almost no Shinigami had ever seen the Soul King with their own eyes. They couldn't confirm the authenticity of this information at all. And the 2 or 3 captains who knew some information would not explain these unbearable inside stories of the Suriidai to everyone. That's just a load of nonsense. A foreign Shinigami who has been in the Godai 13 for less than 200 years is actually slandering the Suriidai like this. Yamamoto Genryusai shouted sternly. Yamamoto Genryusai's killing intent suddenly erupted, and the powerful aura caused the surrounding Shinigami and Arankar to change their expressions greatly. However, Yusuke, who was the main target of his killing intent, didn't change his expression but laughed loudly instead. How pathetic, Yamamoto Genryusai. Before long, I will personally uncover these shameful histories of the Suriidai. At this moment, Yusuke and Yamamoto Genryusai simultaneously released their Zanpakuto. All things in the universe turned to ashes, Ryūjin Jakka. The soaring flames erupted with the 2 as the center, and the air at the scene immediately became much hotter. Yusuke swung his sword with force, and used the force of the collision between Ryūjin Jakka and Yamamoto Genryusai to take a few steps back, creating some distance between the 2. Captain Commander Yamamoto, after this war, there can only be one of us alive. According to the rules of Soul Society that 2 Shinigami have awakened the same Zanpakuto, shouldn't we fight alone? Yusuke said with a smile. Yamamoto Genryusai said coldly, that's right, I was already planning to execute you personally. Then I'll be waiting for you above the sky. Yusuke said with a smile. Then, Yusuke instructed Ulquiorra behind him, Ulquiorra, you will be in charge of coordinating the battle here. As Yusuke's words fell, a golden light similar to a negation fell from the sky, covering Yusuke's body, and Yusuke's figure slowly disappeared from this light. Seeing that Yusuke had arrived above the sky, Yamamoto Genryusai did not hesitate, and immediately turned into a ball of fire, rushing towards the sky and disappearing. Kaiarakushuinsue, if anything happens to me, You will be the new captain commander of the Godai 13. Only this sentence left by Yamamoto Genryosai remained in the air. And what the members of the Godai 13 did not guess was that this sentence was also the last order that Yamamoto Genryosai, as the captain commander, left to the Godai 13. The departure of Yusuke and Yamamoto Genryosai allowed the originally scorching air to return to its normal temperature. The members of the Godai 13 and the higher-ups of Las Noches on the scene confronted each other, and the killing intent they condensed became stronger and stronger, only waiting for an opportunity to strike. In terms of spiritual pressure and aura, the Las Noches side was obviously more dominant. The Espada, with their astonishing spiritual pressure, put great pressure on the Shinigami of the Godai 13. Behind the captains of the Godai 13, some vice-captains and seated officers gradually felt uncomfortable, and cold sweat dripped from their foreheads uncontrollably. Kill. Just as the killing intent was condensed to the extreme, Ulquiorra and Kairakushuinsue simultaneously uttered the word kill. Instantly, hundreds of black shadows intertwined, and powerful spiritual pressure erupted. The captains and the Espada members tacitly found their respective opponents. They knew that the key to this war lay with them, and this was the awareness that captains and Espada members should have. In order to ensure that their battles did not affect others as much as possible, the captains and Espada who were fighting also consciously moved towards the empty direction, creating distance from others. Soon, the two sides, who had originally gathered together, divided into dozens of small battlefields around Las Noches, and everyone found their opponents. At the outermost edge, Kenpachi Zaraki grinned and stood in front of Retsu Unohana, who had a gentle face. Captain Unohana, is it time for us to settle things? To be honest, I almost didn't recognize you with your current hairstyle. Kenpachi Zaraki's gaze was fixed on Retsu Unohana, and the killing intent contained in his spiritual pressure locked onto the other party. Isane Kotetsu, who was behind Retsu Unohana, changed her expression, not expecting that her captain would be targeted by this terrifying-looking guy. At this time, she didn't know that her captain was actually the first Kenpachi of the Godai 13, and could be considered the strongest Shinigami in the Godai 13 besides Yamamoto Genryosai. Although she was the captain of the medical squad, Retsu Unohana knew that she had to pick up the sword of slaughter again now. Before coming to Hueco Mundo, Captain Commander Yamamoto Genryosai had personally talked to her, requesting her to show all her strength in this war that was related to the survival of the Suriidai. Slowly drawing the Zanpakuto Minazuki from her waist, which had not been stained with blood for hundreds of years, it was a very slender Zanpakuto, and miraculously possessed both healing and killing abilities at the same time. Captain Unohana, we. Isane Kotetsu had just wanted to persuade Retsu Unohana not to fight the other party, but the spiritual pressure and killing intent that erupted from Retsu Unohana in the next moment completely stunned her, and she couldn't believe that the person in front of her was her captain. After Retsu Unohana's spiritual pressure erupted, it actually overwhelmed Kenpachi Zaraki, and the soaring killing intent made everyone nearby couldn't help but look sideways. Not only the Shinigami of the Godai 13, but even the Espada could not underestimate the power displayed by Retsu Unohana. Due to the airflow caused by the spiritual pressure, Retsu Unohana's hair, which was originally twisted into braids and hanging in front of her chest, was all blown away, turning into long hair that draped over her shoulders. The always calm and kind eyes also disappeared, replaced by a chilling indifference. Isane Kotetsu stared blankly at her captain, completely unable to understand why the other party had such a huge change. Kenpachi Zaraki grinned and licked the serrated Zanpakuto in his hand. This is what you should look like, the first Kenpachi. $20. $40. Chapter 364, NZNT, Chapter. Las Noches, Research and Development Department. Because the Espada and their respective fraction had all gathered outside Las Noches to joy. Las Noches, Research and Development Department. Because the Espada and their respective fraction had all gathered outside Las Noches to jointly deal with the attacking Godai 13, the inside of Las Noches was more empty than ever before. Orihime and Sato, who had infiltrated Las Noches, also noticed the anomaly, and took the opportunity to sneak into the Research and Development Department, wanting to take the opportunity to find and rescue Yuryu Ishida. In their eyes, this was simply a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, what they didn't know was that the people in the Research and Development Department didn't just know how to conduct scientific research. Not to mention Mayuri Kuratsuchi and Sailaporo Grands, even Nimue Kuratsuchi was not someone they could deal with right now. As soon as they stepped into the Research and Development Department, they were discovered by Mayuri Kuratsuchi, who had set up countless surveillance cameras. At first, Mayuri Kuratsuchi thought that a Shinigami from the Godai 13 was trying to attack this place, but after sensing that the aura was human, he was very surprised. Therefore, Mayuri Kuratsuchi prepared to personally go and see what the purpose of these two humans was. Sato-kun, where do you think Ishida-kun is? This place is so big, I really don't know where to go, Orihime asked Sato, who was beside her. However, before Sato could answer, Mayuri Kuratsuchi had already stretched his head out from behind them, in between the two of them. Because the two of them were staring intently at the researchers in the research and development department in front of them, they didn't notice that Mayuri Kuratsuchi was already standing behind them. So you're looking for Ishida-kun? Why don't you just go in and ask? Mayuri Kuratsuchi said softly. Hearing the voice ringing in their ears, Orihime and Sato both nodded. But soon they reacted and realized that these words were not said by either of them, and immediately turned their heads to look. If they hadn't looked, it would have been fine, but as soon as they saw Mayuri Kuratsuchi's bizarrely painted face, the two of them were immediately startled. Orihime even screamed and fainted from the fright. Knowing that he and Orihime had been exposed, Sato immediately picked up Orihime and ran away. After running for a long distance, he finally stopped panting in a deserted place. Seeing that no one was chasing after him, he breathed a sigh of relief. Oh, I didn't expect you, this disgusting-looking hulk, to be quite the runner. A strange voice rang in Sato's ear. At this time, Sato was still wearing Charlotte's tight, waist-revealing uniform, which did look very unsightly. Hearing Mayuri Kuratsuchi's words, Sato was so frightened that he threw a punch, but it was easily caught by the other party's withered palm. This is not the power that a human should possess. It seems that there are some secrets in your body. Let me dissect you on the spot and see what kind of structure you have. Mayuri Kuratsuchi laughed sinisterly, and a sharp scalpel directly appeared in his left hand, and he slashed it downwards towards Sato's chest. If he had been hit by this slash, then Sato would have been disemboweled directly. At this time, Mayuri Kuratsuchi's attack speed was not considered fast, but Sato's fist was tightly grasped by Mayuri Kuratsuchi, and he couldn't retreat at all. Just as Mayuri Kuratsuchi was about to succeed, suddenly a bandage wrapped around Mayuri Kuratsuchi's hand holding the scalpel. Yo, practicing medicine without a license is illegal. Do you mind if I take a look at your medical license, Your Excellency? The one who suddenly appeared was none other than Yuruchi, who had come to Hueco Mundo in advance because she was worried about Ichigo and the others. Also wearing a sexy style of tight-fitting clothes, the effect was completely different when worn on Yuruchi compared to Sato or Charlotte. I was wondering who had been hiding on the side all along. I didn't expect it to be the famous Flash Goddess Yuruchi, Mayuri Kuratsuchi said with a smile. I didn't expect the great director Mayuri of the Research and Development Department of Hueco Mundo to actually recognize humble me. It's really making me flattered. I wonder if Director Mayuri can let these two little friends and the one behind me go for my sake. Yuruchi said slowly. Hearing this, Mayuri Kuratsuchi looked behind Yuruchi and found that it was actually Yuryu Ishida, who should have been in the laboratory of the Research Institute. In fact, if it hadn't been to turn back to rescue Orihime and Sato, Yuruchi would have secretly rescued Yuryu Ishida already. As expected of the one called Flash Goddess, no wonder our king has always praised you so much, Mayuri Kuratsuchi said with a gloomy face. Hearing this, Yuruchi said with a slight surprise, Uchiha Yusuke. That's really the greatest praise for me. Although the two sides were enemies now, Yuruchi had to admit that Yusuke was a formidable opponent. To be able to possess such powerful strength, and to play Soul Society and Sasuke Aizen between his fingers, was truly a terrifying figure that was rare to see in 1,000 years. Speaking of this, Mayuri Kuratsuchi thought that Yuruchi was going to continue to exchange pleasantries with him, when Yuruchi suddenly erupted with spiritual pressure, and came to Mayuri Kuratsuchi's side with super speed Shuinpa. The two of them engaged in close-quarters combat with Hakuda at an extremely fast speed, but it was clear that Yuruchi had the advantage in speed, and the close-quarters Hakuda quickly suppressed Mayuri Kuratsuchi, causing him to become flustered. Just as Mayuri Kuratsuchi was about to be unable to hold on, he immediately gave up attacking Yuruchi, and instead adopted a strategy of encircling way to rescue Zhao, directly attacking Sato on the side. This was the moment that Yuruchi had been waiting for, and she directly pulled Sato out of the battle. Sato, Ishida, you two immediately take Orihime and leave this place. I'll take care of this guy, Yuruchi said, staring intently at Mayuri Kuratsuchi, with her back to Sato and the others. Knowing that they couldn't interfere and would only hinder Yuruchi if they stayed here, Sato and Yuryu Ishida immediately took the unconscious Orihime and left this place. Seeing that his experimental subjects were about to escape, Mayuri Kuratsuchi immediately wanted to chase after them, but was easily intercepted by Yuruchi, who was superior to him in speed. Director Mayuri, why don't we just sit down and have a good chat? Yuruchi said with a smile on her face. Mayuri Kuratsuchi said with a gloomy face, do you think that they can leave Las Noches like this? Let me tell you, Las Noches only has one exit, the palace gate, and there is a guy guarding that exit who may be even stronger than me. Although Mayuri Kuratsuchi believed that Yuryu Ishida and the others could not leave Las Noches, he still felt greatly humiliated that the experimental subjects had escaped from his hands. Hearing Mayuri Kuratsuchi's words, Yuruchi's expression gradually became serious. She didn't expect that Las Noches would actually have some reservations even in the face of the Godai 13's all-out attack, and had not dispatched all of their high-level combat power. Seeing Yuruchi's unsightly expression, Mayuri Kuratsuchi felt much better. Slowly grasping his Zanpakuto, Mayuri Kuratsuchi said with a grin, "Since you let my experimental subjects escape, then use your own body to compensate me." Bankai, Kanjiki Ashisoji Jaizo. $20. $40. Chapter 365, NZNT, Chapter. At the same time as the war between Las Noches and the Godai 13 began, Ichigo and Rukia were fighting in a deserted palace in Las Noches. At the same time as the war between Las Noches and the Godai 13 began, Ichigo and Rukia were fighting in a deserted palace in Las Noches. Due to the influence of the Hogyoku in her soul, Rukia's spiritual pressure and the power of her moves far exceeded those of ordinary Shinigami. Sodi no Shirayuki, which was not particularly outstanding among Ice-type Zanpakuto in terms of power, displayed extraordinary power in Rukia's hands. At this time, in this frozen, empty palace, Rukia was like a fairy with snowflakes flying around her, wielding the artistic Sodi no Shirayuki in her hand in a dazzling manner. However, hidden beneath this dance-like swordsmanship was unimaginable power. As long as any tiny snowflake around Rukia touched someone, these snowflakes would immediately spread out into crystals with powerful freezing power, turning the person who touched them into an ice sculpture. Ichigo, who had already activated Bankai, was now completely at a disadvantage, and could only dodge with extraordinary speed. He didn't even dare to use his weapon to touch Rukia's Zanpakuto, lest he be entangled by the snowflakes on Rukia's Zanpakuto. If it were a normal battle, Ichigo wouldn't be so embarrassed. After activating Bankai, his Black Getsuga Tensho was very outstanding in terms of both speed and power, and opponents of the same level would generally find it difficult to resist this move. But now his opponent was Rukia, and Ichigo couldn't use Getsuga Tensho to deal with her, and could only think of other moves to deal with her. However, after racking his brains, Ichigo found that the only move he had mastered was Getsuga Tensho. He really didn't have any other skills. Helpless, Ichigo decided not to deal with Rukia anymore, but instead break through and leave directly, and leave Hueco Mundo directly after finding Yuryu Ishida. Getsuga Tensho. Ichigo concentrated his power and unleashed a Black Getsuga Tensho at the frozen palace wall. However, what shocked him was that his Getsuga Tensho only left a small gap in this frozen wall, and the gap was quickly frozen and restored to normal. Ichigo, it's useless. The ice crystals that freeze this palace are spiritual power ice crystals formed at temperatures close to absolute zero. Their hardness far exceeds that of ordinary ice, and they can be continuously restored with my spiritual power. From the moment you stepped into this palace, you were destined to be frozen by me and sent back to the human world. Rukia's voice rang in Ichigo's ears, and her words made Ichigo realize how unfavorable the current situation was for him. Rukia, why are you stopping me when you have such power? Why don't you rescue Yuryu with me? Ichigo shouted unwillingly. A trace of intolerance flashed in Rukia's eyes, but it quickly turned into firmness. You don't know how deep the water is in Las Noches. No matter how strong you are, you can't take Ishida-kun away from Las Noches. It will only put yourself in a desperate situation. I promise you with my life that Ishida-kun will be able to return to the human world safely in at most 3 years. Ichigo said in a deep voice, if that's your answer, then I can only say that I'm very disappointed. But I won't blame you. I will defeat you and rescue Yuryu with my own strength. Pressing a hand on his face, Ichigo prepared to unleash his strongest power, holification. After Kisuke Urahara's special training a while ago, Ichigo was able to control the power of holification very well. Even if he didn't hand over control of his body to Hollow Ichigo, he could still fight in a holified state for a relatively long time. It was for this reason that he was so confident in coming to Hueco Mundo to rescue Yuryu Ishida. As Ichigo's hand wiped across his face, a hideous hollow mask with black markings appeared on his face. At this moment, Ichigo's speed instantly increased again by a lot, making it almost impossible for Rukia to keep up with his movements. Rukia, this palace is frozen by relying on your spiritual power. That means that as long as I can knock you out, without your spiritual power supply, this frozen palace will return to its original normal state. Ichigo's voice came out from the hollow mask, and his voice had a bit of an electronic feel because of the mask. Ichigo, don't you understand yet? From the moment you stepped into this palace, you no longer had any chance. Rukia said calmly. Although she could no longer keep up with Ichigo in terms of speed, she, who controlled a wide range of freezing abilities, didn't need to keep up with the other party's speed at all. As long as he was within her domain, Ichigo would have no way to escape. Bankai, Haka no Togame. In Ichigo's astonished gaze, an incomparably dazzling white light erupted from Rukia's body. Like the hazy mist in a fairyland, the white frost and snow quickly spread out from Rukia's body to the surroundings. At this time, Rukia's hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes had all turned snow white, and a beautiful ice crystal headpiece had appeared on her head. The white Las Noches uniform she was originally wearing had also disappeared, turning into an exquisite and simple white palace dress, surrounded by fluttering white ribbons, just like a moon palace fairy. Although Rukia now looked as beautiful as a fairy, in reality, this beauty hid a deadly danger. After Rukia activated Bankai, the temperature in the already very cold palace dropped even more. Even if she didn't use any moves, Ichigo felt that his body was gradually becoming numb. Ichigo, at this temperature, you have no way to approach me at all. Even your Getsuga Tensho will be frozen by absolute zero before it gets close to me, Rukia said slowly. As Rukia's words fell, she turned into a white mist and quickly moved towards Ichigo's direction. As Rukia got closer, Ichigo felt that the surrounding air and temperature became more and more stagnant. Although he wanted to retreat, he found that his legs had already lost control and could not move at all. Suddenly, Ichigo felt a cold yet warm sensation. Rukia was already close at hand, hugging him tightly. The coldness was the ice and snow spiritual power produced by Sodi no Shirayuki, and the warmth was Rukia's embrace, and the heart that still regarded him as a friend. Ichigo, forgive me. I also know that no one wants to hear words like, I'm doing this for you, but only in this way will everyone be truly safe. Tsugi no Mai, Hakuren. Rukia looked at Ichigo's eyes in front of her with an apologetic look, and the snowflakes around her gradually froze Ichigo's body completely. At this time, Ichigo could not react in any way, and could only look at Rukia in front of him, and then feel his limbs, body, heart, brain, and even consciousness gradually losing sensation, until he finally lost consciousness completely. $20. $40. Chapter 366, NZNT, Chapter. The ice sealing technique used by Rukia was very similar to the spirit coffin that Yusuke had once used to seal her sister, Hizana Kuchiki. The ice sealing technique used by Rukia was very similar to the spirit coffin that Yusuke had once used to seal her sister, Hizana Kuchiki. Although the principles were not the same, the effects achieved were almost indistinguishable, both perfectly sealing living beings or spiritual bodies along with their life force. When the seal was released, the state of the sealed person would still be perfectly restored, without any changes. In the original Thousand-Year Blood War, Rukia, without the power of the Hogyoku, only relied on her own ability to unleash the Bankai, Haka no Togame, form, which was consistent with the current one, but her absolute zero's powerful force made it impossible for her to control it. Not to mention developing such a perfect sealing technique as it is now, she couldn't even move normally, and it was called a extremely fatal Bankai by Byakuya Kuchiki. The extremely fatal that Byakuya Kuchiki mentioned was not only aimed at the enemy, but also at Rukia herself. The rest is to find Inoue-kun and Sato-kun. Rukia put Sodi no Shirayuki back into its scabbard, and the crystals on the inner walls of the frozen palace quickly receded at the same time, and soon returned to its normal state. The bone-chilling feeling disappeared, leaving only Ichigo's ice sculpture in the palace. On the battlefield outside Las Noches, the all-out war had already begun, and the captains and the Espada members were already fighting together. However, it was not difficult to see from the scene of the battle that the spiritual pressure of the captains was generally lower than that of the Espada, and almost all the captains were currently at a disadvantage. At the center of the battlefield, the most watched battle was the one between Shunsui Kairaku and Coyote Stark, the first Espada. As a veteran captain and regarded as the successor by Captain Commander Yamamoto Genryusai, Shunsui Kairaku had always shown himself to be unfathomable, and Coyote Stark, as the first Espada, was also regarded by most people as the top master in Las Noches, second only to Yusuke. At this time, Yusuke and Yamamoto Genryusai had both gone above the sky, so the most critical victory or defeat on the scene was likely to be between Shunsui Kairaku and Coyote Stark. Stark. Charge, quickly kill him. Just as Stark and Shunsui Kairaku couldn't tell whether they were confronting each other or slacking off, Lily Nettie, who was riding on Stark's shoulder, had already become irritable, banging Stark's head with her small fists while shouting loudly to kill Shunsui Kairaku in front of her. However, Stark was a master who was even more proficient in slacking off than Shunsui Kairaku. Not only did he ignore Lily Nettie, who was making a fuss on his head, but he started chatting with Shunsui Kairaku on his own. Captain, look, we're both so old, let's just skip the fighting, how about leaving this kind of battle to the young people around us? Hearing Stark's words, Shunsui Kairaku also showed a smile. I didn't expect there to be such a sensible person among the Arrancar. It's really great. As expected of someone who ranks first among the Espada, you really have a very insightful view. Hirako had provided the information about the Espada to Kisukirahara, and Kisukirahara had also organized it all and handed it over to the Godii 13 through Yoruichi's hands. Therefore, the rankings of the Espada were not a secret among the captains of the Godii 13. After Shunsui Kairaku finished speaking, he actually used his strongest move, encouraging drinking, and took out a sake bottle and 2 sake cups from inside his captain's haori. As for Shunsui Kairaku's encouragement to drink, Stark was not so bold as to dare to drink the enemy's things. The Godii 13 also had a research and development department. If they developed some kind of poison targeting Arrancar, he would be finished. After being politely rejected by Stark, Shunsui Kairaku didn't get angry, and began to pour and drink for himself. Although Shunsui Kairaku seemed to be drinking, he was actually paying attention to the surrounding battle situation all the time. I didn't expect the power of the Espada to be so strong. Now, apart from hoping that the old men can defeat Uchiha Yusuke, I can only hope for Kasukirahara's so-called backup, Shunsui Kaiaraka thought with a lazy smile on his face, but his heart was very heavy. At this critical moment, Shunsui Kaiaraka's actions were not really to slack off, but to hold back the other party's strongest combat power. He himself was not confident that he could defeat Stark, so this kind of delay was the best strategy. However, at this time, Stark was much more at ease than Shunsui Kaiaraku. He was also paying attention to the situation on the field, and the Arrancar had completely gained the upper hand. As long as he remained undefeated, then Lost No Chase would win the overall victory. The two uncles, who were slacking off while making their own plans, glanced at each other, and then silently looked away, as if they both knew what the other was thinking. Apart from Stark and Shunsui Kaiaraku, these two slacking uncles, the other Espada and captains were fighting very hard. Among them, Tier Haribel, the third Espada, was facing Toshiro Hitsugaya, the captain of the 10th Division. Comparing the intensity of their spiritual pressure, Toshiro, who was not too old, could be said to be far inferior to Haribel. However, fortunately, his ice-type ability perfectly restrained Haribel's water-type ability, which gave him the ability to deal with Haribel. But even so, he was still firmly suppressed by Haribel, and had no room to fight back at all. Neliel II Odelschwank, the 5th Espada, was facing Chojiro Sasakaibe, Yamamoto Genryusai's lieutenant. Being valued by Yamamoto Genryusai, Chojiro Sasakaibe's own strength could be considered to be at the middle level among the captains. However, facing Neliel, who surpassed him in all aspects of spiritual pressure, speed, and power, he had no power to fight back at all. If it weren't for the fact that Neliel was kind-hearted and couldn't bear to bully this elderly Shinigami who was between an uncle and an old man, this battle would have ended long ago. Grimjow Jaeger Jaquez, the 6th Espada, had found Jushiro Yucatake, the captain of the 13th Division, as his opponent. Although Yucatake had always been plagued by serious illness, his strength could be said to be at the upper level among the captains. Yucatake's Zanpakuto was called Sojio no Kotowari, and it was a rare dual-sword type Zanpakuto in Soul Society. One of his two Zanpakuto could absorb any energy-type attacks, and the other could enhance and release the absorbed energy to counterattack. It could be said to be an extremely simple but also the most practical ability. In addition, Yucatake himself was a master of Kido, and his swordsmanship was also very outstanding. If it weren't for his weak constitution that made his endurance poor, he could be considered a perfect Shinigami. It was precisely because of his strength that he became one of the few captains who was not at a disadvantage, and fought fiercely with Grimjow, even forcing Grimjow to release his Resurrection. Facing Zamari Rurose, the 7th Espada, was Ikaku Madarame, the captain of the 11th Division. At this time, Ikaku, who had a tough fighting style, was already in critical condition. Zamari Rurose's ability was to control the body parts of his opponents through his gaze. Once he looked at his opponent, he could leave an eye mark on the opponent's body. As long as there was an eye mark on the body, the part where the mark was located would be controlled by Zamari Rurose. If the mark landed on the head, then the entire body and mind would be controlled by Zamari Rurose. At this time, there was already an eye on Ikaku's bald head, and it was clear that he had been controlled by Zamari Rurose. And Ikaku's opponent at this moment was no longer Zamari Rurose, but his lieutenant and friend, Yumichika Ayasegawa. It could be said that this battle was purely Zamari Rurose's game. If he wanted to end it, he could let Ikaku understand his own life at any time. $20. $40. Chapter 367, NZNT, Chapter. In a corner of the battlefield outside Lost No Chase, Neutra Gilga, the 8th Espada, set his sights on Sajin Komamura, the captain of the 7th Division. The battle between the two was also the bloodiest of all the fights. In order to repay Yamamoto Genryusai for his kindness, Sajin Komamura returned to the clan elders before the war began. He offered his heart to that elder, in exchange for the humanization technique that allowed him to return to his true form and greatly increase his spiritual pressure, and also awaken the second form of Kakujo Tengen Myo-o, Dangaijo. In this form, Tengen Myo-o transformed into a giant demon covered in blood red, completely abandoning the original hard armor outside its body, and exchanging its defensive power for a significant increase in attack power and recovery power. However, Sajin Komamura, who had offered his heart, only had the power of this one battle left. As long as he stopped fighting, he would permanently revert to his beast form, and from then on become a beast without intelligence. Therefore, this battle was the last battle in Sajin Komamura's life. From the beginning of the battle, Sajin Komamura was the only one among the captains of the Godai 13 who had gained the upper hand, and had always been firmly suppressing Neutra. For Neutra, who was warlike, crazy, and arrogant, such a performance, when almost all the Espada members were able to suppress or even crush their opponents, simply made him lose face. In extreme anger, Neutra activated the power of Segunda Etapa, and he also became the first Espada member in this battle to use Segunda Etapa. Under Segunda Etapa, Neutra's entire body was covered in black, hard armor, surrounded by dark yellow demon flames. The long-handled four-bladed scythe in his hand disappeared, replaced by a more powerful crescent-shaped arm blade. When Noitra in Segunda Etapa and the second form Tengen Myoho controlled by Sajin Komamura fought together, the battles of the other captains and Espada members paled in comparison. Perhaps the spiritual pressure levels of Noitra and Sajin Komamura were not the strongest, but in terms of the degree of bloodshed and the intensity of the fighting, it was definitely the most thrilling. Arinyero Araruri, the 9th Espada, and Luppy Antenor, the 10th Espada, respectively faced Kaien Shiba, the lieutenant of the 13th Division, and Sui Feng, the captain of the 2nd Division. At this time, Kaien Shiba had initially mastered the ability of Bankai. With his outstanding fighting talent, he was barely able to temporarily sustain the battle when he met Arinyero, whose strength was considered to be at the bottom of the Espada. Arinyero was the only Jillian among the Espada, and his talent lay in infinite evolution. Although his growth space was indeed much stronger than other Jillians, and even surpassed most Ajuchas, he had not been able to reach the so-called infinite level. Arinyero himself did not have any special powerful abilities, but fortunately, his spiritual pressure steadily surpassed Kaien Shiba. Even if he could not easily defeat the other party, at least he was invincible. As for Luppy Antenor and Sui Feng, Luppy Antenor was also superior in terms of hard power. However, Sui Feng relied on her excellent, super speed Shuinpa, and there was no big problem in dealing with Luppy Antenor for 3 days and 3 nights. If there were no unexpected circumstances in the overall situation on the battlefield, the Espada had completely taken control of the battle, and Yusuke's plan to develop the Hogyoka to enhance the power of the Arrancar had perfectly achieved its intended goal. Among the captains of the Godai 13, apart from Shunsui Kairaku, who was paying attention to the situation on the field at all times, Kisuke Urahara, who was also the key to this war, was also secretly calculating in his heart. The opponent that Kisuke Urahara was currently fighting was Baragan Luzenbarn, the 2nd Espada, the Skull Emperor. Faced with Baragan's aging energy attacks, Kisuke Urahara did not respond directly, but kept dodging. For him, he would never use his true strength to fight unless absolutely necessary. Kisuke Urahara was well aware that once a trump card was revealed, it could no longer be called a trump card from then on. "You brat, are you just going to keep dodging?" Baragan said to Kisuke Urahara with great dissatisfaction. At this time, Baragan was sitting on a magnificent throne composed of bones, floating in midair, surrounded by purple aging mist. Kisuke Urahara ignored Baragan's provocation, but looked at the battle situation of the captains of the Godai 13 around him. At this time, apart from Shunsui Kairaku, who was holding back Stark in a slacking-off manner, there was no danger for the time being, but the other captains seemed to be in dire straits for the most part. Toshiro had been constantly beaten down by Haribel, and the cross-shaped ice flowers representing his Bankai time were about to disappear completely. Although Yukitake himself was very strong, his physical strength was obviously unable to keep up, and he began to be suppressed by Grimmjow. If the time dragged on any longer, even if he didn't die at Grimmjow's hands, he might run out of physical strength or even get sick directly. Chojiro Sasakaibe had already fallen at Neliel's feet. Seeing that everyone except Noitra, who was still struggling, had basically won, Neliel didn't take any action, but stood aside and watched the battle. The reason why Neliel didn't take action to help Noitra was not because of her dissatisfaction with Noitra. She would not take internal contradictions to heart during this great war. However, she knew that the guy Noitra hated the most was being helped by women, especially herself, who had defeated him twice. Not only would her intervention not help Noitra, it might even backfire, causing Noitra to fight her. On the other side, Zamari's opponent, Ikaku Madarame, had completely become a puppet, and was fighting with his friend Yumichika Iasegawa. Zamari himself was leisurely watching the show from the side. Kaien Shiba, who was fighting Arinyero, was also about to be unable to hold on. The spiritual pressure on his body was constantly weakening. Obviously, he, who had just mastered Bankai, had to face an opponent of the Espada level alone, which exceeded the range that his strength could bear. Sui Feng, relying on her super speed Shuinpa, had no problem protecting herself, but it seemed that she had no way to defeat Luppy Antenor, who had transformed into a tentacle monster. What worried Kisuke Urahara the most was that Ulquiorra, the 4th Espada, was calmly standing aside and observing the battlefield. In the situation that the Godai 13 no longer had enough power to fight against the Espada, Ulquiorra, as the commander designated by Yusuke, only needed to be on standby to guard against emergencies. Seeing that everyone's situation didn't seem to be very good, Kisuke Urahara frowned and muttered to himself, "I didn't expect the power of the Arrancar to be much stronger than I predicted. It seems that it's time to use his power." Baragan also heard Kisuke Urahara's words, and said with a sneer, "Mere Shinigami, do you think you have even a glimmer of a chance of winning? From the moment you stepped into Hueco Mundo, your fate of defeat was already doomed." Kisuke Urahara looked at Baragan, a flash of light flashed in his eyes. "Is that so? Then what if we let hollows deal with hollows?" Baragan was stunned when he heard this. He didn't understand the meaning of Kisuke Urahara's words. Kisuke Urahara didn't explain any further to Baragan, but pointed the Zanpakuto in his hand at the sky, and the spiritual pressure on his body suddenly erupted. Release it, the true Vasto Lord. A golden spiritual power exuding a strange spiritual pressure rushed towards the sky. Although this spiritual power was not strong, it gave all the Arankar present an extremely dangerous feeling. At the same moment, a golden spiritual power fell from the sky directly above the location where Ichigo was frozen, directly covering Ichigo's ice sculpture. In Rukia's unbelievable gaze, cracks actually began to slowly appear on Ichigo's ice sculpture. Did this golden light destroy my seal? No, the seal is being destroyed from the inside. The story continues. Also, the author has put the Hogyoku Espada diagram in the pinned post in the book Friend Circle, as a reference to the influence of the Espada's Segunda Etapa in this book. $20. $40. Chapter 368, NZNT, Chapter. When the ice sculpture sealing Ichigo's body began to crack, an extremely dangerous spiritual pressure aura emanated from within the ice sculpture. Seeing this, Rukia immediately drew Sodi no Shirayuki, which she had just sheathed back at her waist, and looked at the ice sculpture with a solemn expression, as the cracks had completely spread. In the next moment, the ice crystals outside the ice sculpture shattered instantly, and these ice crystals shot out in all directions at an extremely fast speed, and the powerful force easily pierced through the walls of the palace. Rukia dodged most of the ice crystals that were shooting towards her location, but when there was an ice crystal that she couldn't dodge, she could only raise the Zanpakuto in her hand and use the side of the blade to block it. However, what she didn't expect was that she was directly knocked away by this small ice crystal, and even her body smashed through the walls of the palace. Rukia, who had been knocked out of the palace, spat out a large mouthful of blood, and then heard a roar similar to an elephant's cry coming from inside the palace. Then, a humanoid black shadow, of which she could only barely see the outline of a bull's head, directly passed through the top of the palace and flew towards the battlefield outside Las Noches. Rukia was shocked, and immediately re-entered the palace to look for Ichigo, but found that she could no longer find his trace. Was that shadow just now Ichigo? Why did I feel a hollow spiritual pressure from him, and it even surpassed all the Vasto Lord I know? Rukia was very puzzled in her heart. Unable to stop worrying about Ichigo, Rukia didn't care too much, and immediately rushed in the direction of the Black Shadow's flight, wanting to find out why such an astonishing change had occurred in Ichigo. At this time, the true power of Hollow Ichigo within Ichigo's body was released by Kisuke Urahara through special means, and the powerful spiritual pressure aura emanating from his body attracted the attention of everyone within Las Noches. Facing Kisuke Urahara, Baragan asked Kisuke Urahara with a solemn expression, "What exactly did you just do? To whom does that spiritual pressure that is rapidly approaching here belong?" Kisuke Urahara had a smile of victory on his face. "This is a hollow invented by a very respected enemy of mine. I believe its power can redefine the level of the Great Hollow." As one of the three great scientists of the Shinigami world, Kisuke Urahara discovered the power hidden within Hollow Ichigo in Ichigo's body during his special training for Ichigo. This power made him feel that it was not inferior to the Hogyoku that could make him feel fear. Kisuke Urahara was very certain that as long as he could stimulate this power for Ichigo, then he could create a top-level combat power that was enough to reach or even surpass Captain Commander Yamamoto Genryosai. After discovering this, Kisuke Urahara applied to Yamamoto Genryosai to enter the Great Spirit Book Repository to find some secret scientific data, and was approved by Yamamoto Genryosai. Under normal circumstances, the Great Spirit Book Repository would never allow anyone to enter. However, now that the Central 46, which had been slaughtered by Aizen, was being reorganized, and temporarily no longer had the ability to restrict the Godii 13, and was also facing a war that would determine the life and death of the Siriidii, Yamamoto Genryosai released this permission. Soon, Kisuke Urahara found the knowledge he wanted in the Great Spirit Book Repository, and with his own scientific research ability and the resources of the entire Research and Development Department, he successfully found the spiritual pressure frequency that could awaken the Bullhead Hollow Ichigo in Ichigo's body and guide the Bullhead Hollow Ichigo to execute his orders. And this was precisely the reason why Kisuke Urahara was full of confidence in this war. Originally, Kisuke Urahara planned to guide the power of the Bullhead Hollow when both sides were fighting to the point of being white-hot, giving Las Noches a killing blow and determining the victory or defeat of the war. However, what he didn't expect was that the battle was not able to enter the white-hot stage, but the situation completely tilted to one side towards Las Noches, and the captains of the Godii 13 were simply unable to resist the Espada who had fused with the Hogyoku. Under this situation, Kisuke Urahara had no choice but to awaken the Bullhead Hollow in advance to help the Godii 13 reverse the situation. However, the power of this hollow in Ichigo's body is even more terrifying than I imagined. It's even stronger than the spiritual pressure displayed by Uchiha Yusuke and the Captain Commander during the Sokayaku Hill battle. It seems that the victory or defeat here is beyond doubt. Kisuke Urahara thought to himself. He didn't think that the hollow in Ichigo's body would definitely be able to defeat Yusuke or Yamamoto Genryosai, but at least the spiritual pressure had reached the same level. Under the crushing of this realm, the Lost No Chase battlefield, without Yusuke and Yamamoto Genryusai present, would also be controlled by him. As long as Yamamoto Genryusai defeated Yusuke again, then this war between the Itachi and Lost No Chase would end with the complete victory of the Itachi. Ulquiorra, who had been on standby outside the battlefield, also sensed that the bullhead Ichigo was rapidly approaching, and that unfathomable spiritual pressure gave him a sense of palpitation. However, since he had been entrusted with an important task by Yusuke, he did not hesitate to take the initiative to meet him, along with his fraction, Yami. At this time, Yoruchi, who was fighting Mayuri Kuratsuchi in Lost No Chase, also felt the aura of the bullhead Ichigo, and couldn't help but worry about Ichigo in her heart. Alas, he really used the power in Ichigo's body after all. I just hope that Ichigo can still return to his original state afterwards. Yoruchi knew about Kisukirahara's research, and also knew that Kisukirahara currently only knew how to guide the power of the hollow in Ichigo's body, but could not confirm what would happen to Ichigo once this power was guided out. Afterwards, Ichigo might be assimilated or devoured by the hollow, or he might be able to turn back into the original him. All of this was still unknown. Is this a Vasto Lord? No, could it be that there are even higher-level hollows above Vasto Lord? I really want to go and take a look. Mayuri Kuratsuchi, who also sensed the unusual spiritual pressure of the bullhead Ichigo, said with shining eyes. At this time, Mayuri Kuratsuchi had already released his Bankai, Kanjiki Ashisoji Jizo, a giant worm with a bizarre baby's head surrounded the courtyard, which was not very large, and surrounded him and Yoruchi. At this moment when Mayuri Kuratsuchi was distracted, a smile appeared on Yoruchi's face. Then you can go and take a look. Bye-bye. Suddenly, Yoruchi jumped out of the large circle formed by the body of Kanjiki Ashisoji Jizo with a super speed Shuinpa, and disappeared without a trace in 2 swishes. Mayuri Kuratsuchi's eyebrows furrowed together. At this time, he was also hesitating whether to chase Yoruchi or go and take a look at the spiritual pressure that made him very interested. Forget it, anyway, he is guarding inside Lost No Chase, so let him worry about this flash goddess Yoruchi. After thinking for a few seconds, Mayuri Kuratsuchi decided to follow his curiosity, and immediately drove his giant worm towards the battlefield outside Lost No Chase. Great, the palace gate is in front of us. Leaving there is equal to leaving Lost No Chase. Yuryu Ishida looked at the Lost No Chase gate not far away, and shouted happily to Sato, who was carrying Orihime beside him. At this time, due to the bumps of running, Orihime, who had just been frightened unconscious by Mayuri Kuratsuchi, gradually woke up and was very surprised to see Yuryu Ishida beside her. Just when the few people thought that they were about to escape, suddenly a cold man wearing a white robe and carrying a zanpakuto at his waist stood at the palace gate, blocking their way. Although this man was just standing there, the powerful aura emanating from his body gave the 3 of them a feeling of almost suffocation. It's over, humans. $20. $40. Chapter 369, NZNT, Chapter. Blocking Yuryu Ishida and the other 2 was Byakuya Kuchiki, who had been stationed in Lost No Chase on Yusuke's orders. Damn it, he's Kuchiki-kun's brother, the former captain of the 6th Division in the Godai 13. Orihime, who had regained consciousness, had come down from Sato's shoulder. Seeing Byakuya Kuchiki's appearance, her face showed a very flustered expression. Having dealt with the people of Soul Society so many times, they already knew the combat power grading of the Godai 13, and were very clear that the Shinigami of the captain level were not opponents that they could handle now. At this time, a layer of arm guards appeared on each of Sato's arms, which were his full-bring abilities, Brazo Derechada Gigante, and Brazo Izquierda del Diablo. Now that things have come to this, we can only bite the bullet and charge. You 2 stay behind, I'll follow. However, before Sato could finish speaking, he saw a large amount of blood splattering in front of him. As a burst of severe pain came from his chest, Sato knelt down weakly, and then fell to the ground with a thud. Sato. Sato-kun. Seeing Sato suddenly knocked down, Orihime and Yuryu Ishida both exclaimed. Orihime immediately lowered her body and used Santen Keshin to heal Sato's injuries, while Yuryu Ishida condensed a spiritual bow and arrow in his hand, aiming at Byakuya Kuchiki in front of him. In their eyes, Byakuya Kuchiki just now seemed to have not moved at all. But they were very clear that this enemy must have used a move that they couldn't see to draw his sword, and instantly slashed Sato. Yuryu Ishida, obediently returned to the Research and Development Department, otherwise I will chop off that man's head with the next slash, Byakuya Kuchiki said in a calm tone. Byakuya Kuchiki did not have the habit of attacking women, and Yuryu Ishida was a target that could not be harmed, so Sato could only be unlucky and become the chicken that Byakuya Kuchiki used to kill the chicken to warn the monkeys. Hearing Byakuya Kuchiki's words, Yuryu Ishida gripped the spiritual bow and arrow in his hand even tighter. The enemy in front of him gave him an unsolvable problem. If he chose to fight or run away, then it would mean that Sato would definitely lose his life. He had no choice at all. Canceling the spiritual bow and arrow in his hand, Yuryu Ishida sighed, I understand. Orihime, who was healing Sado, looked at Yuryu Ishida with worried and unwilling eyes. Although her purpose in coming to Hueco Mundo was to save Yuryu Ishida, Sado's life was now threatened again. A strong sense of powerlessness rose in the hearts of the few of them. This was precisely the sorrow of the weak. Byakuya-kun, it seems that you're doing well in Las Noches. You're even better at putting on airs than before. How about giving your sister, who has loved you since you were a child, some face and letting them go? At this time, a woman's voice suddenly rang out. As a black shadow flashed in front of everyone, Yoruichi had already blocked between Byakuya Kuchiki and Yuryu Ishida and the others. Seeing Yoruichi's appearance, hope rekindled in the eyes of Yuryu Ishida and Orihime. Yoruichi, you can't stop me now, Byakuya Kuchiki said calmly. A dangerous light flashed in Yoruichi's slender phoenix eyes. She said with a smile, it's been so long since we last met, your tone has become a lot bigger. You're really not cute at all now. When speaking, Yoruichi emphasized the word cute, as if she wanted to emphasize something. When she was in the Serie Iti, she had always liked to tease the young Byakuya Kuchiki with her super speed Shuinpa, and would praise the other party as cute every time she succeeded, which had always been considered a disgrace by the proud Byakuya Kuchiki. As if Yoruichi's provocation had taken effect, Byakuya Kuchiki snorted coldly and directly activated super speed Shuinpa, arriving at Yoruichi's side, and at the same time used an extremely fast drawing sword technique to slash horizontally at Yoruichi. A black shadow flashed, and Yoruichi had actually stood with both feet on Byakuya Kuchiki's blade. Not only was her speed so fast that it was jaw-dropping, but even her body seemed to have no weight at all. Afterwards, Yoruichi and Byakuya Kuchiki engaged in a series of exchanges that Yuryu Ishida and Orihime, who were on the side, couldn't see at all. At this time, although Byakuya Kuchiki's speed was still inferior to Yoruichi, it was already enough to cope with Yoruichi. Scatter, Senbon Sakura. Byakuya Kuchiki's cold voice rang out, and countless beautiful blade edges, like cherry blossom petals, surrounded everyone like a tornado. He was well aware that it was impossible to defeat a master like Yoruichi without using Bankai, and in order to prevent others from slipping away, using a massive amount of Senbon Sakura blades to control everyone within a certain range was the best option. Using your ultimate move right from the start, that's not like you, Kuchiki-kun. While quickly exchanging blows with Byakuya Kuchiki, Yoruichi teased him. Although she still looked very relaxed on her face, Yoruichi was very serious in her heart. She realized that Byakuya Kuchiki was far more troublesome than he had been in the Serie Iti. As a genius of the Kuchiki clan, Byakuya Kuchiki's talent had always been among the top among the captains. However, in the various battles in the original story, he had never been able to display his due strength. Even if he defeated his opponent, he would generally win miserably. In fact, the real reason for this was not his own strength, but that he always held a noble air and posture, which prevented him from perfectly displaying his strength. However, after the battle with Jin Ichimaru, he had understood his own problems. At the same time, after receiving guidance from Yusuke and being given the ability to holofy, the current Byakuya Kuchiki was far more terrifying than before. After trapping everyone with Senbon Sakura blades, Byakuya Kuchiki did not insist on continuing to engage in high-speed Shuinpa and Hakuda exchanges with Yoruichi, but instead used Senbon Sakura blades to condense 12 spiritual light swords to protect himself, and at the same time took out one from them as his weapon. I told you, you can't stop me now, Byakuya Kuchiki said calmly. Relying on the advantage of the spiritual light swords around him, he quickly suppressed Yoruichi, making Yoruichi completely afraid to launch close-range attacks. After realizing that the situation was not good, Yoruichi immediately retreated, creating some distance from Byakuya Kuchiki. At this moment, she didn't say anything more, but her expression became extremely serious, and an astonishing spiritual pressure erupted from her body. Her long ponytail also raised upwards due to the eruption of spiritual pressure, making her look incredibly imposing. Shunko, Ryūjin Senkei, Flash War Cry, Thunder God Battle Form. At this time, a pair of Thunder God horns made of white lightning actually appeared on Yoruichi's head, and 6 Taiko Magatama pulsating with white lightning appeared behind her, and the spiritual pressure on her entire body was far beyond her normal state. Seeing Yoruichi's form, a look of surprise appeared on Byakuya Kuchiki's always calm face. He didn't expect Yoruichi to be hiding such a powerful force. If he hadn't mastered the ability to holofy, then he really wouldn't be Yoruichi's opponent. Looking at Byakuya Kuchiki's expression, which quickly returned to normal after being surprised, Yoruichi smiled, Byakuya-kun, you've really grown too much under Uchiha Yusuke. Not only has your strength impressed me, but even your mentality is much calmer than before. Byakuya Kuchiki said slowly, indeed, if it weren't for Yusuke-senpai, I still wouldn't be your opponent now. Hearing this, Yoruichi raised an eyebrow, so you mean that because of his existence, you are now able to defeat me? Byakuya Kuchiki did not answer immediately, but pressed his left hand on his forehead. As he pulled his hand down, a hideous hollow mask appeared on his face. A powerful spiritual pressure soared from Byakuya Kuchiki's body, and all the Senbon Sakura blades that were originally constantly rotating like pink cherry blossom petals turned scarlet, as if they had been stained red with blood. Yoruchi Shihoin, today is the day I truly surpass you. $20. $40. Chapter 370, NZNT, Chapter. Above the sky of Hueco Mundo, the originally dark white sand sea was now illuminated by the firelight emitted by the raging flames. Within these burning flames were Yusuke and Yamamoto Genryusai, who stood at the pinnacle of Shinigami. At this time, Yusuke also sensed through spiritual pressure the series of battles taking place below the sky, the bullhead hollow awakened by Kasukirahara, and Yoruchi's Shunko, Ryūjin Senki, and so on. Yusuke wasn't too worried about the battle between Yoruchi and Byakuya Kuchiki. Although the two were enemies, he knew that no matter who won or lost, both sides would show mercy. However, the appearance of the bullhead hollow had the potential to destroy the huge advantage that originally existed in Las Noches. Even Okiura, who had fused with the Hogyoku and mastered Segunda Etapa, might not be a match for the bullhead hollow now. Just as Yusuke was distracted, he suddenly sensed a strong killing intent locking onto him. After discovering the danger, Yusuke instinctively activated the Hogyoku Susanoo, and this reaction saved him from the danger of being seriously injured or even killed. As a giant samurai burning with flames surrounded Yusuke, a crimson explosion appeared on the left side of the samurai's body. The intense high temperature and the impact of the explosion actually blasted open the body of the Hogyoku Susanoo, revealing the ribs inside its body, and almost touched Yusuke himself, who was hidden inside. Uchiha Yusuke, you actually have the guts to be distracted in the face of me. It seems that I haven't used my hands for too long in the past 1,000 years, and people are starting to look down on me. At this time, Yamamoto Genryusai was still maintaining the horizontal slashing posture. The explosion attack just now was just a slash under his shurikai, and it almost had the power possessed by the initial explosion form of Zanka no Tachi, and almost broke through the defense of the Hogyoku Susanoo. As expected of the strongest Shinigami of the millennium. If I hadn't diverted half the power of Ryūjin Jakka, the carelessness just now would probably have been enough to take my life, Yusuke said slowly. At this time, Yusuke also abandoned the distractions in his heart. This battle with Yamamoto Genryusai did not allow him to be negligent in the slightest. Even though he had an advantage in the combat methods he had mastered, Yamamoto Genryusai still possessed the power to kill him. Moreover, he had not made any special preparations specifically for Yamamoto Genryusai, unlike Aizen, who used the Hogyoku to create Wonderweiss Margila, or Yawatch, who specially prepared the Sternritter script to absorb Bankai, and so on. If he wanted to defeat the Yamamoto Genryusai in front of him, he could only rely on his own hard power. Holding Ryūjin Jakka horizontally in front of his chest, Yamamoto Genryusai said in a deep voice, I also didn't expect that attack could be defended against, but I will do my best in every move after this. Bankai, Zanka no Tachi. The flames that were originally wrapped around Yamamoto Genryusai all flowed into the Zanka no Tachi in his hand. At this time, Yamamoto Genryusai did not use any of the moves of Zanka no Tachi, but was just equivalent to preparing the starting stance. Once he launched an attack, every move would inevitably be enough to destroy the world. Seeing Yamamoto Genryusai activate Bankai, Yusuke also immediately activated Bankai Zanka no Tachi. At this time, all the flames above the sky were absorbed by the two Zanka no Tachi, and there was no longer the firelight that had just illuminated the entire sky. However, although there were no more flames, the temperature in the air became extremely high. If ordinary creatures were to appear here, a few seconds would be enough for them to be directly roasted by the high temperature in the air. A killing intent flashed in Yamamoto Genryusai's eyes, and he waved the Zanka no Tachi in his hand forward, and a red sword light had already flown to Yusuke's eyes. Zanka no Tachi, Kita, Tenchi Kaijin. Yamamoto Genryusai had used this move at Sokayaku Hill before, but because it was in Soul Society, he did not release all of his spiritual pressure. At this moment, in Hueco Mundo, Yamamoto Genryusai no longer had any scruples. At the moment the sword light was slashed out, the slash itself seemed unremarkable, but the entire sky inexplicably flashed with red light. This red light seemed to be flames, but it also seemed to be blood. Yusuke raised the spiritual pressure of his entire body to the maximum, and the Zanka no Tachi in his hand appeared in the Hogyoku Susanoo's hand. What could directly confront the Bankai of Zanka no Tachi was naturally only the Bankai of Zanka no Tachi. Zanka no Tachi, Ishiki, Ryu and Bobu. 9 crimson golden fire dragons emerged from the Zanka no Tachi in Susanoo's hand. 2 of them wrapped around the blade of Zanka no Tachi, and the other 7 surrounded Susanoo's huge body. The 4 forms of east, west, south, and north of Zanka no Tachi were created by Yamamoto Genryusai. As an opponent, Yusuke would not use his abilities, but would develop his own moves to deal with it. Ishiki, Ryu and Bobu was Yusuke's starting move based on Susanoo's Bankai Zanka no Tachi. Its purpose was not to attack, but to strengthen himself with the power of the spiritual fire dragons. Raising the Zanka no Tachi in his hand, surrounded by fire dragons, Susanoo successfully blocked the sword light that Yamamoto Genryusai slashed out. However, the so-called Tenchi Kaijin was not just this slash in front of him. The hidden power within had not yet erupted. At the moment when the sword light of Tenchi Kaijin came into contact with Susanoo's long sword, a sky-covering flame shot out towards the direction where Susanoo was located. Just like a crimson giant screen, based on the line where the sword light was just now, spread out towards the front, and the entire world was shrouded in this flame giant screen. At this time, Yamamoto Genryusai, on the other side of the flame giant screen, had a gloomy face. He could sense that the other party's spiritual pressure had not decreased, but was actually showing a tendency to increase. Through the sensing of spiritual pressure, he found that the 9 fire dragons surrounding Susanoo were absorbing the power of the explosion flames, and were constantly expanding their own spiritual pressure by using these forces. Just then, Yamamoto Genryusai suddenly discovered that the target in the spiritual pressure sense had disappeared from its original location. Not good. Yamamoto Genryusai was shocked. Years of combat experience made him instinctively turn around and raise his sword to block. Only a loud noise was heard, and his body was directly knocked away, and standing in his original position was the Susanoo, whose entire body was wrapped in fire dragons. Although Susanoo's body was huge, its speed was not slow at all, and its movements were extremely agile. Even Yamamoto Genryusai did not expect that this giant samurai could launch such a swift attack. Because of the large amount of flames that Yamamoto Genryusai's Tenchi Kaijin had just erupted, the ground full of sand and stones in the shrouded area had all been melted into magma by the high temperature. Yamamoto Genryusai himself, who had been knocked away, was standing in the magma. Zanka no Tachi, Nishi, Zanjitsu Goki. Scorching flames ignited from Yamamoto Genryusai's body, and the temperature of these flames was extremely high. If the enemy approached him with insufficient spiritual pressure defense, they would be vaporized by this temperature in an instant. $20. $40. Chapter 371, NZNT, Chapter. Faced with Yamamoto Genryusai's Zanjitsu Goki, Yusuke did not stop attacking. Although the other party was defending with extremely high temperatures, Yusuke, whose Zanpakuto was also Zanka no Tachi, was not afraid of this. Susanoo instantly arrived in front of Yamamoto Genryusai, and the long sword wrapped around the fire dragon slashed forward with unmatched momentum. Yamamoto Genryusai roared, and the already gnarled muscles on his body bulged even more with blue veins, and even a crimson color shone through them, as if what flowed in his body was not blood, but magma. At this time, Yamamoto Genryusai's white eyebrows and white beard had all turned into raging flames, and the whole person was like a fire god descending into the world. With a loud bang, one large and one small Zanka no Tachi collided together, and a soaring pillar of fire erupted at the intersection. Even Yusuke did not expect that Yamamoto Genryusai would not dodge or avoid, but would directly use his physical body to wield his sword and forcefully resist Susanoo's slash. And what surprised him even more was that the other party actually steadily blocked Susanoo. Yusuke stood quietly within Susanoo, and his mind continued to control Susanoo to continuously attack Yamamoto Genryusai. All that could be seen were one large and one small fiery red figures constantly intersecting, and each collision caused a violent flame shock. Such an impact had little effect on Yamamoto Genryusai and Yusuke, but it was enough to kill the existence of an ordinary captain-level member of the Godai 13. After the two sides fought for a while, the elderly Yamamoto Genryusai finally gradually fell into a disadvantage. If it were him 1,000 years ago, he might have been able to suppress Susanoo in such a battle, or even directly break through Susanoo's body with his power. But after all, his physical strength was now beginning to decline. Such a high-intensity battle could not last long, and his own explosive power was far less than it had been in the past. Captain Commander Yamamoto, to be honest, there are not many people among the Shinigami whom I admire, and you are definitely ranked first. You are the only Shinigami in all of Soul Society who has been able to cultivate spiritual pressure, power, and skill to such an extent by himself. Looking at Yamamoto Genryusai, who was already showing signs of being unable to hold on, Yusuke said in a sincere tone. Whether it was him or Aizen, they had all reached this realm with the help of some special means. As for what kind of strength Ichibi Hyasub, the captain of the Zero Squad hidden in the Spirit King Palace, possessed, Yusuke could not speculate before seeing him. After all, the battle between Ichibi Hyasub and Yawatch in the 1,000-year Blood War arc could not reveal the true realm of the two, and could only see various strange skills like hacks. The current Yusuke could not make a reasonable judgment on their level of power. Hearing Yusuke's words, Yamamoto Genryusai snorted coldly. For him, being at a disadvantage but still receiving praise from the enemy was a kind of extreme humiliation. Yamamoto Genryusai flashed backwards, creating distance from Susanoo. Then, he inserted the Zanka no Tachi in his hand vertically into the ground, which had already turned into magma under his feet, and countless scorching heat rose from within the magma. Did you think that you already had victory in your grasp? I haven't used my full strength yet. Zanka no Tachi, Minami, Kaka Jumano Kushi Deizojin. Then, countless dry and charred hands stretched out from where the heat was rising, and then a large number of mummified corpses crawled out. Not only were there a large number of these mummified corpses, but the spiritual pressure emanating from them was also very astonishing. Most of these mummified corpses already possessed the spiritual pressure of a vice-captain level member of the Godai 13, and a small number even reached the spiritual pressure of a captain level. Minami, Kaka Jumanokushi Daizojin, was an ability mastered by Yamamoto Genryusai to use the enemies he killed for his own use. All the souls of the enemies he killed would be absorbed by his Zanka no Tachi, and summoned to turn into mummified corpses to assist him in fighting when needed. These mummified corpses in front of him were all the souls of the dead under Yamamoto Genryusai's sword, and the enemies who were worthy of Yamamoto Genryusai's sword were naturally not mediocre people before they died, and the power of the mummified corpses they transformed into after death was also extraordinary. Yamamoto Genryusai's move could be said to be an army formed by one person, and it was an army with very powerful individual strength. At this time, these mummified corpses did not move slowly like the zombies in some TV series or movies in the human world, but moved extremely quickly, and instantly surrounded Susanoo. Susanoo waved the long sword in his hand and constantly slashed, and each slash could solve dozens of mummified corpses, but soon more mummified corpses rushed up. Although Susanoo killed these mummified corpses very quickly, just like cutting melons and vegetables, these mummified corpses actually possessed an immortal body. Even if they were killed now, they would soon be reborn in the magma, and could not be killed or cut off at all. Before long, some mummified corpses successfully climbed onto Susanoo's huge body, and constantly attacked Susanoo's body with sharp claws or teeth. Susanoo had hard armor outside his body and fire dragons surrounding him that could protect his body, but these mummified corpses from the magma were completely unafraid of the high temperature, and the claws and teeth attached with powerful spiritual pressure actually possessed the power to corrode spiritual power. Although the mummified corpses could not break through Susanoo's powerful defense in a short time, they greatly hindered Susanoo's movements and slowly eroded Susanoo's spiritual pressure invisibly. Looking at Susanoo, whose body was gradually covered with mummified corpses and whose movements were getting slower and slower, Yamamoto Genryusai held Zanka no Tachi horizontally in front of his chest. Zanka no Tachi, Higashi, Kyokujitsujin. Higashi, Kyokujitsujin could be said to be the original move of Zanka no Tachi, sealing all the flames within it, and obtaining the ultimate power concentrated on the blade. And based on Yamamoto Genryusai's ultimate spiritual pressure, this ultimate flame even rose to a concept beyond temperature, but possessed the power of rules, able to erase everything it touched into nothingness. Yusuke, standing in Susanoo, naturally also discovered the other party's actions, and knew that the other party, because of his lack of physical strength, did not intend to continue the war of attrition but wanted to concentrate all his strength to give himself a final blow. Yusuke raised his left hand and swiped it downwards on his face, and a strange mask, as calm as water without a trace of hideousness, appeared on his face. After this mask appeared, the extremely hot air around Yusuke actually returned to normal temperature. At the same time, the same mask appeared on Susanoo's face, and the flames burning around him and the surrounding crimson fire dragons all turned pale. This change in the nature of the flames was precisely the influence caused by Yusuke's hollowification. Hollow Ichigo in Ichigo's body controlled the black, violent power, and the black Getsuga Tensho possessed unparalleled destructive power. And Hollow Yusuke in Yusuke's body controlled the white, void power, possessing the ability to dissolve and devour. Zanka no Tachi, Nishi, Zanjitsu Goki. Susanoo's entire body suddenly erupted with a torrent of pale white flames, and his spiritual pressure was raised to its limit. All the mummified corpses that were crawling on his body and still attacking him with sharp claws or teeth were burned to ashes by the raging pale flames, and could never be reborn from then on. Having regained his mobility, Susanoo raised the Zanka no Tachi in his hand, which was wrapped around two white fire dragons, and directly inserted it into the scorched earth under his feet. Countless pale flames, like auroras, shot out from the ground, completely annihilating all the souls that were still active. It could be said that from then on, Yamamoto Genryusai's Minami, Kaka Jumanokushi Daizojin was abolished, and all the demons under his sword that had accumulated over thousands of years were turned into nothingness under Yusuke's pale flames. $20. $40. Chapter 372, NZNT, Chapter. As Yusuke eliminated the souls summoned by Yamamoto Genryusai walked towards Yusuke step by step. He wasn't moving forward quickly, but with each step he took, the momentum on his body increased by 1 point. The terrifying aura constantly raised his spiritual pressure, as if the entire world belonged to him. Faced with the aggressive Yamamoto Genryusai, Yusuke knew that this move was unavoidable and could only be blocked head-on. At this moment, Yusuke no longer held back and poured all of his spiritual pressure into the Zanka no Tachi in Susanoo's hand. This confrontation could be considered his first truly all-out battle since coming to the Shinigami world. Zanka no Tachi, Sans Hiki, Shoku. The pale flames and the 9 fire dragons of Susanoo merged into the Zanka no Tachi in Susanoo's hand, turning it into a long sword that was entirely pale and even slightly transparent. Kill. An extremely dazzling firelight flashed in Yamamoto Genryusai's eyes. After roaring, he stepped in front of Susanoo, and the charred Zanka no Tachi in his hand, gathering all of his spiritual pressure, slashed forward. The pale long sword in Susanoo's hand also slashed forward, and two long swords, one large and one small, one black and one white, intersected. There was no earth-shattering flame, nor was there an impact from the collision of spiritual pressure. There was only the dangerous confrontation concentrated at the intersection of the blades. At the moment of intersection, black lines appeared on the pale giant blade in Susanoo's hand. As these lines spread, the pale flames overflowed from it, and the Shokujitsujin, which had sealed the pale flames, disintegrated in this way. As a black sword light flashed, Susanoo's huge body was split in two from the waist by Yamamoto Genryosai. There were no signs of cracking at the waist of Susanoo, because it was not cut off by the sword, but erased by the destructive power that had been condensed to the extreme. Accompanied by a loud noise, Susanoo's huge body, divided into two halves, fell to the ground. From this moment on, you are the master of Zanka no Tachi. Uchiha Yusuke. Yamamoto Genryosai said slowly. As soon as he finished speaking, the charred Zanka no Tachi in his hand suddenly turned gray and white, and then, like decayed and weathered stone, turned into dust and scattered in the air. And Yusuke, who should have been in Susanoo, was now standing behind Yamamoto Genryosai with a pale Zanka no Tachi in his hand. Farewell, Yamamoto Genryosai Shigekuni. Yusuke released the bankai of Zanka no Tachi and sheathed it. As soon as his voice fell, a white light appeared in Yamamoto Genryosai's chest behind him, and countless blood spurted out from it. Yamamoto Genryosai's spiritual pressure, which had been like a mountain, slowly receded, and there was no trace of life on his body. Thus, Yamamoto Genryosai Shigekuni, the strongest Shinigami who had stood at the pinnacle of Shinigami for thousands of years, died in Hueco Mundo, and the only ownership of Zanka no Tachi was finally determined. Turning around and looking at Yamamoto Genryosai, who was still standing upright after his death, Yusuke sealed his body in a spirit coffin. Yusuke had always respected the strong. Even if Yamamoto Genryosai was his enemy, he should be treated with dignity after his death. It's time to end this war. Just as Yusuke and Yamamoto Genryosai were dueling, the situation on the battlefield outside Las Noches had also undergone tremendous changes. Kisuke Urahara, controlling Bullhead Ichigo, joined the battlefield, which immediately broke the balance of power on the scene. Although Okuiora, who had fused with the Hogyoku, also took the initiative to intercept Bullhead Ichigo, he was still far from being his opponent. In terms of power level, Bullhead Ichigo was obviously higher than Vastalord. Even if Vastalord had completed Arankarization and fused with the Hogyoku, it would not be enough to bridge the gap in this level. After Bullhead Ichigo appeared, Stark, who had been slacking off with Shunsui Kairaku, knew that he could no longer watch the show and quickly activated Segunda Etapa, wanting to deal with Shunsui Kairaku. After Segunda Etapa, Stark was surrounded by a faint blue and black spiritual pressure, and was also surrounded by spiritual particle chains with powerful destructive power. As Stark, the number one Espada, his spiritual pressure at this moment could be said to have reached the limit of spiritual pressure that a Vastalord-level hollow could reach. However, Shunsui Kairaku, the old fox, naturally also noticed the change in the situation. While sighing at Kisuke Urahara's clever methods, he began to use delaying tactics to fight Stark. With the overwhelming combat power displayed by Bullhead Ichigo, as long as he could steadily hold Stark back for a moment, it wouldn't be long before Bullhead Ichigo could deal with the other Espadas, and then deal with Stark later. The other Espadas on the battlefield also discovered the power of Bullhead Ichigo. The Espadas who could free their hands no longer held back, and used Segunda Etapa to help Okuiora jointly besiege him. At this time, Bullhead Ichigo was surrounded by 4 Arankars who had already activated Segunda Etapa, namely Okuiora Cypher, Neliel II Odelschwank, Yami Largo, and Samari Ruros. In addition to them, Mayuri Kuratsuchi was also observing Bullhead Ichigo with his various strange instruments. Okuiora and the others and Bullhead Hollow's figures quickly intertwined, and the few of them jointly surrounded Bullhead Ichigo and constantly launched attacks. However, even under Segunda Etapa, the Arankars were still unable to gain the slightest advantage over Bullhead Ichigo. Lanza del Relampago, Loma Cholera. Okuiora, who had transformed into a 4-winged black-winged demon, had 6 spiritual particle spears entwined with the power of lightning appear around his hand, and shot at various parts of Bullhead Hollow's body as if teleporting. However, Bullhead Hollow did not even use the weapon in his hand, but just waved his left hand lightly, and swept all 6 seemingly unparalleled spears of lightning into pieces. At this time, a centaur-shaped Arankar appeared behind Bullhead Hollow. It was Neliel, who had activated Segunda Etapa. Her original light green hair had turned dark purple, her white goat horns had turned into dark horns like a demon, her entire body was surrounded by scorching purple flames, and her original double-headed spear had turned into a spear composed entirely of purple flames. Lanzagrina. The purple flames in Neliel's eyes ignited, and the purple flames on the spear in her hand swirled into a sharp whirlwind, and suddenly stabbed towards Bullhead Ichigo's back. Bullhead Ichigo also instinctively sensed the danger of this move, and immediately turned around and raised the long sword in his hand, stabbing straight at the purple flame spear that was already close at hand. The red spiritual pressure at the tip of the long sword spurted out, directly blowing away the purple flames, and even forcing Neliel to retreat hundreds of meters away. Yami and Zamari, who had activated Segunda Etapa on the side, were also constantly cooperating with Ulquiorra and Neliel to attack Bullhead Ichigo, but all of their attacks were useless, and even caused themselves to suffer minor injuries. Zamari's Gemelo Sonido, which could control enemies, was completely useless when it encountered Bullhead Ichigo, whose spiritual pressure level was much higher than his. Even if he imprinted his Gemelo Sonido on Bullhead Ichigo's body, the other party seemed to be completely unaware and was completely out of his control. Just when Ulquiorra and the others were at a loss, a powerful spiritual pressure descended from above the sky. And the descent of the spiritual pressure also indicated that the battle between Yusuke and Yamamoto Genryusai above the sky had ended. Who exactly won? Everyone present could not help but temporarily stop fighting, waiting for the owner of the spiritual pressure to appear. $20. $40.